Have you ever wondered whether the image of Jesus Christ that you often see in paintings, church statues, or classic films actually resembles his true face more than 2,000 years ago? What seems like a simple question actually hides a long journey of faith, history, art, and even untold layers of culture. That is why today, we are going to explore one of the greatest mysteries of all time. Was the real appearance of Jesus different from what we think we know? In the minds of most people, Jesus often appears with a familiar look, a bright face, long brown hair flowing down his shoulders, deep blue eyes, fair skin, and a neatly kept beard. This image has been engraved into our consciousness for centuries, becoming an unshakable template whenever his name is mentioned. Churches, Renaissance religious paintings, and even Hollywood's most famous films have all reinforced this image. But here is the question: did this depiction come from reality? Or was it the product of imagination, art, and perhaps even political and cultural influences? If we turn back the clock to the 1st century, in the land of Galilee and Judea, we find a very different context. This was the Middle East, a place of harsh climate, burning sun, and difficult daily life. The local population at that time, mostly Jewish people, were of average build, not particularly tall, with darker sun-kissed skin, thick black curly hair, and strong features shaped by a Mediterranean lifestyle. Their facial structure often included prominent noses, brown or dark eyes, and bodies hardened by physical labor. Placing Jesus within this context, it is highly unlikely that he had golden hair and ocean blue eyes like the paintings portray. Modern studies in anthropology, archaeology, and history all suggest that the popular image of Jesus we see today does not reflect the reality of a Jewish man in the 1st century. In fact, many historians believe that the fair-skinned, tall, gentle-faced depiction of Christ was gradually shaped as Christianity spread into Europe, particularly during the Roman Empire in the Middle Ages. The need to connect with believers and elevate his divinity in the eyes of Europeans unintentionally transformed his appearance, making him resemble a Western figure more than a Middle Eastern man. This leads us to a fascinating truth. What you have believed and remembered your whole life may just be a version that was recreated, repainted, and even altered to fit the times. That image is not wrong, for it has become a universal religious symbol, but it may not represent historical reality. So, if the familiar face we know is not accurate, then what did Jesus really look like? This is only the beginning of our journey. In the next parts, we will dive deeper into ancient sources, archaeological evidence, and even scientific reconstructions of Jewish skulls from the 1st century to get closer to the truth. But before we move on, I'd love to hear from you. Do you believe Jesus looked like the familiar Western image? Or do you think he had a completely different appearance? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to hit like so. I know you want me to keep uncovering this mystery with you. To understand more about the true appearance of Jesus, we need to return to historical and archaeological evidence, the scarce traces left behind from the land where he once lived. The Bible, while an essential source, does not provide a detailed description of his appearance. This leaves a huge gap, one that allowed his image to be shaped for centuries almost entirely by human imagination and the hands of artists. Archaeologists have often asked, if Jesus was a Jewish man living in the 1st century, wouldn't his face have looked more like the ordinary Jewish people of that time, rather than bearing the European-like features we often see? A groundbreaking study published in 2001 by a team of British scientists used an ancient Jewish skull found in Galilee to reconstruct a possible face. The result was strikingly different. A man shorter than today's average, with dark curly hair, tan skin, a broad nose, and a rugged face. This, they suggested, may be closer to the reality of what Jesus looked like. This changes not only how we picture him, but also reveals a fascinating truth: the graceful, gentle image of Jesus in art is more symbolic than historical. Early believers and artists wanted him to appear divine and relatable to European culture. That was how Christianity spread more effectively in a world full of competing belief systems. That beautiful image inspired millions of faithful followers. But at the same time, it made us forget that Jesus once lived as a real human being, with a simple and humble appearance shaped by the harsh life of his homeland. Another notable point comes from passages in the Bible that suggest Jesus did not have an especially attractive appearance to draw attention. The prophet Isaiah wrote in the Old Testament, "He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance, that we should desire him." This reinforces the idea that Jesus was not remarkable for his looks, but rather for his teachings, his character, and his presence. Perhaps this is the deeper message. His power did not lie in outward appearance, but in spirit and salvation. If we imagine the social setting of that time, it becomes easier to see that an ordinary Jewish man, simple in dress, sun-darkened from labor and travel, was a far more realistic picture of Jesus. He was the son of a carpenter, raised in a modest family, and constantly exposed to hardship. Such a life forged the resilience, compassion, and influence that later defined him. But why did his image change so drastically over time? The reason lies in how Christianity spread and adapted to different cultures. When it reached Europe, Jesus had to be portrayed in ways that felt familiar to the people there. And so, from the earliest paintings in Italy and France, gradually spreading across the West, a European Jesus was born. From that point on, two images coexisted: the historical Jesus, Middle Eastern in appearance, and the symbolic Jesus, fair-skinned, neatly bearded, and resembling Europeans. This contrast raises an intriguing question. Which image should we believe in? The one preserved through art, or the one grounded in history? Perhaps the answer is that both carry their own meaning. On one hand, he was a flesh and blood man with the ordinary look of a Jewish person in the 1st century. On the other hand, he became a spiritual symbol into which people poured their faith, hope, and longing for salvation. These two portraits, though different, coexist to portray the full essence of a figure who changed the course of human history. To get closer to the true portrait of Jesus, we need to look at how his image was constructed over the centuries. The familiar depiction we know today of fair-skinned Jesus with blue eyes and long brown hair did not appear in the earliest days of Christianity. Instead, it gradually took shape through history, especially as the religion spread beyond the Middle East. In the 1st centuries after Jesus' death, believers focused mainly on spreading his teachings rather than describing his physical appearance. As a result, the earliest Christian art was far more symbolic than realistic. Some ancient mosaics found in 3rd and 4th century churches depict Jesus as a young man with short hair, no beard, and sometimes dressed like a Greek philosopher. This clearly reflects the influence of Greco-Roman culture on early Christianity. But when Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire in the 4th century, everything changed. Emperors and church leaders needed a powerful, majestic, divine image to reinforce authority. It was during this time that depictions of Jesus began to show him with long hair, a full beard, and a solemn face, looking more like a king than a humble preacher. This was also when the Christ Pantocrator image emerged, Jesus seated on a throne, surrounded by radiant glory. It was at once a religious symbol and a political tool, strengthening Christianity's place in society. During the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, European painters such as Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael further reinforced this image. Their Jesus was graceful and idealized, fair skin, luminous eyes, balanced features, and noble presence. This vision became the standard, replicated in thousands of artworks across Europe. It was not only art, but also a cultural and religious instrument that shaped faith for millions of believers. However, from this point onward, the gap between the historical Jesus and the symbolic Jesus grew wider. If Jesus truly had the humble appearance of a Middle Eastern Jew, then portraying him as a fair-skinned European was a recreation shaped by cultural and devotional needs. That image was beautiful and inspiring, but it risked making us forget the real man who once walked the dusty paths of Palestine more than 2,000 years ago. Another fascinating aspect is that different cultures have painted Jesus in their own likeness. In Africa, some depictions show him with darker skin. In parts of Asia, artists have given him features resembling local populations. This shows that, to believers, Jesus is not only a historical figure but also a universal symbol, one who can adapt and transform to touch the hearts of all nations. His image, therefore, transcends specific details of appearance. Yet this flexibility also presents a paradox. The more his image has been reshaped, the harder it becomes to imagine what he truly looked like. Paintings and statues, however magnificent, are reflections of human longing rather than historical truth. And it is precisely this tension that makes the search for the real face of Jesus such a compelling and mysterious journey. Even to this day, when it comes to uncovering the true appearance of Jesus, one of the most important approaches is archaeology and anthropology. While no portraits of him from the 1st century survive, the discoveries of ruins, human remains, and scientific reconstructions have given us a glimpse of what this historical figure may have looked like. In the early 21st century, a team of forensic experts and archaeologists in the UK undertook a bold project, reconstructing the face of a 1st century Jewish man using a skull found in Galilee. With modern technology and anthropological data about ancient Jewish populations, they produced an image vastly different from the familiar Western version of Jesus. Instead of long brown hair, blue eyes, and fair skin, the reconstruction showed a man with tan skin, short curly black hair, a square face, a broad nose, and deep brown eyes, features typical of Middle Eastern inhabitants. When the results were released, many believers were surprised, even unsettled, because the image was so different from the standard Jesus they had always known. But for scientists, this was an important clue, proving that the traditional Western portrayal of Christ was more a product of culture than of historical reality. Of course, no one claims that this reconstructed face is the exact likeness of Jesus, but it is certainly more credible than the paintings and statues created centuries later. Archaeology also provides insight into the daily lives of 1st century Jews. They were typically around 1.60 to 1.65 meters tall, with sturdy builds shaped by hard labor, wearing simple dark garments woven from rough fabrics, and faces weathered by the harsh Mediterranean sun. Placing Jesus within this context, we can picture him as a humble man, not much different from those around him. What made him extraordinary was not his physical form, but his words, his spirit, and the magnetic presence that compelled crowds to listen. Interestingly, biblical scholars have pointed out that throughout the Gospels, there is no detailed description of Jesus' appearance. In fact, this absence may carry meaning. His physical look was irrelevant. What mattered were his teachings and actions. He may have blended completely into the crowds, indistinguishable from others, yet it was precisely this ordinariness that made his spiritual power so extraordinary. Some theologians even suggest that Jesus' humble appearance was part of a divine message. He did not come to impress with beauty, but to reach the human heart with truth, faith, and love. Had he possessed a dazzling, otherworldly appearance, his spiritual message might have been overshadowed by admiration for his looks. Instead, by looking like any other man, his words carried universal weight, and his mission of salvation became all the more profound. Here lies a paradox. The more we try to uncover Jesus' true face, the more we realize that his appearance may not matter at all. What humanity truly seeks is not the color of his skin, the shape of his nose, or the length of his hair, but the eternal spirit that shook the world. Yet, the longing to know what he looked like still lingers, for it brings us closer to someone who otherwise feels so distant in history. When we dive into the history of Christian art, it becomes clear that the familiar image of Jesus was shaped over centuries, deeply influenced by culture and politics. The earliest depictions of him did not appear immediately after his death, but only centuries later, as the Roman Empire gradually embraced Christianity. And from that point, his appearance began to be designed in ways that suited the tastes and purposes of each era. In the earliest centuries, Jesus was sometimes portrayed as a youthful shepherd, with a gentle face and a humble demeanor, no different from an ordinary young man. But once Christianity became the official religion of Rome, his appearance quickly transformed. Emperors and the church sought a majestic figure who could symbolize divine authority. Thus, Jesus began to be depicted with a radiant halo, solemn features, long flowing hair, and deep, mysterious eyes. This marked a critical shift, from a simple man to a godlike figure with regal presence. During the Renaissance, great artists such as Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael played a decisive role in shaping how humanity envisions Jesus today. Their masterpieces, filled with light and refined detail, presented an idealized Christ, tall, noble, with luminous eyes, harmonious features, and a perfect balance of power and compassion. These depictions spread across Europe and eventually influenced the entire world. Yet, this was also the moment when Jesus stepped away from his Jewish roots and was recast with distinctly European features, from fair skin and delicate physique to wavy brown hair. These traits reflected the aesthetic ideals of Europeans at the time, not the reality of a Jewish man living in the Middle East. This shows clearly that the image of Jesus we are most familiar with is less a historical portrait than a cultural product, embellished and idealized across centuries. To align with the faith and aspirations of each generation, politics also played a major role in shaping his image. Throughout history, whenever kingdoms or churches wanted to assert power, they often borrowed the figure of Jesus to reinforce authority. A savior with a commanding gaze and majestic appearance naturally became a powerful symbol of divine strength. Over time, this idealized beauty was so deeply ingrained that it became accepted as truth in the devotion of millions of believers. This raises a fascinating question. Is the image of Jesus we know today rooted in history, or is it merely a reflection of culture, art, and power? When we gaze at ancient church paintings, are we seeing a man who once walked the dusty roads of Galilee 2,000 years ago, or the image that generations of artists and leaders wanted us to believe in? Here lies a paradox. The further humanity has moved from the real appearance of Jesus, the more tightly it has clung to an embellished image. And this paradox continues to this very day, as modern scientific research challenges deeply ingrained beliefs held by billions of people around the globe. After our long journey through archaeology, anthropology, art, and the influences of culture and politics, it becomes clear that the true face of Jesus remains an unsolved mystery. Yet perhaps it is precisely this mystery that makes his image eternal in the hearts of humanity. We humans are naturally curious. We want to see, to touch, to know every detail with certainty. That is why the question, what did Jesus really look like, has lingered for centuries. Was he tall or short, with curly or straight hair, with a stern or gentle face? But the more we search, the more we realize that perhaps his physical appearance was never the point. Jesus left no self-portrait, nor did anyone record the details of his face. What remains are his teachings, the stories of his deeds, his miracles, and above all, the love and faith he planted in people's hearts. This absence of description may in fact be meaningful, that he never wanted humanity to worship an outward image, but rather to embrace the essence of truth and love. And this makes sense. The greatness of Jesus lies not in whether he had striking features, but in what he did for humankind. An ordinary man, one who could blend into a crowd, yet carrying a spiritual power strong enough to reshape history. He left behind a legacy that cannot be erased, a timeless message. Love one another, live in truth, and place your faith in what is good. For more than 2,000 years, his image has been reimagined in countless ways. Europeans painted him with their ideals of beauty. Africans depicted him with deep black skin and powerful presence. Asians envisioned him with features that reflected their own people. These many versions do not diminish his essence. Instead, they prove that he belongs to all humanity, not to one race, one nation, or one culture. Perhaps it is this adaptability that makes Jesus so close to every culture. He can appear with any face in the eyes of believers, because his essence is not in the form, but in the eternal spirit. Like light passing through countless prisms, changing colors but never losing its essence, Jesus' image transforms yet remains the same at heart. Thus, when we reflect on the quest for his true appearance, we encounter a paradox. The harder we try to pin it down, the more we see that it may not matter. His power lies not in the visible, but in the invisible, in faith, in hope, in love that continues to inspire billions around the globe. We may never know exactly what he looked like, but that does not weaken his presence. Rather, it makes him an even stronger symbol beyond time and space. A symbol not bound by outward detail, but one that lives eternally in human hearts, reminding us to live with compassion, to believe, and to remain steadfast in our journeys. Perhaps that is the gift history has left us. No single face, but an open space where each of us can see him reflected within our own soul. One Savior, yet countless faces, united by the same faith. Thank you for accompanying me on this journey of mystery and reflection. If you found this video thought-provoking or inspiring, I invite you to leave a like or subscribe to the channel. That simple act will allow us to continue exploring together the hidden stories of history, faith, and life. See you again in the next video, where new journeys full of wonder and insight await.